In the winter of 1953, a small group of American soldiers stood on a firing line at Fort Churchill, Manitoba, on the western edge of Hudson Bay. The temperature was far below zero. The rifles they were testing had been designed thousands of miles away in Belgium and in Massachusetts, and both of them were supposed to be the future of the United States infantry. One of those rifles was already, by most measures, the winner. It had a better reputation. It had more institutional support inside the Pentagon. It had been endorsed by the British and by the Canadians, and it was being manufactured under license by two American companies specifically so that the Army could adopt it without embarrassment. Officers involved in the program spoke about it as though the decision had effectively been made. The other rifle existed because a handful of engineers at Springfield Armory refused to stop working on it. 4 years later, the Army adopted the second one. The story of how that happened is usually told as a straightforward victory, American ingenuity beating a foreign design in fair trials. The surviving record is considerably messier than that, and the strangest part is what happened afterward, because the rifle that lost those trials went on to serve in something close to 90 countries for the rest of the century. And the rifle that won became the shortest-serving standard service rifle in American history. To understand why, you have to start with a problem the Army had been trying to solve since before the Second World War ended. The M1 Garand was a superb rifle for 1936. By 1945, it had two obvious limitations. It fed from an 8-round en-bloc clip rather than a detachable magazine, and it fired only semi-automatically. Soldiers in Europe and the Pacific had spent the war carrying a mixture of weapons to cover the gaps. The M1 carbine, the Thompson, the M3 grease gun, the Browning automatic rifle. Ordnance planners wanted to collapse all of that into a single rifle. One weapon, one cartridge, selective fire, 20-round detachable magazine. That ambition drove American small arms development for the next decade, and it collided almost immediately with a second question that turned out to be more important than the rifle itself. What would it fire? American ordnance had studied the wartime evidence and reached a conclusion it was not willing to abandon. The 3306 cartridge was longer than it needed to be. Improvements in propellant meant a shorter case could produce comparable performance. What ordnance would not accept was a genuinely reduced power round. Full rifle ballistics at long range were, in the American view, non-negotiable, a position rooted in decades of marksmanship doctrine and in the belief that the rifleman's effective range was a national advantage. The British disagreed, and they disagreed with data. Their studies of combat range suggested most infantry fighting happened well inside 300 yards, and they developed a smaller intermediate cartridge, the 1280 British, along with a radical bullpup rifle called the M2 to fire it. For a brief period in 1951, Britain formally adopted the M2. Then, it unadopted it. The United States would not accept the .280, and NATO could not function with two incompatible rifle cartridges. In 1954, the alliance standardized on the American round, designated 7.6251 mm NATO. Essentially, the 30 light rifle cartridge ordnance had been developing at Frankfurt Arsenal. That decision is the hinge everything else swings on. The cartridge was settled before the rifle was. Whichever rifle NATO chose now had to handle a full power round in a lightweight, selective fire package, which is a demanding combination, and one that would eventually cause problems for both finalists. The Belgian entry was the FN FAL, designed by Dudon Saïv, who had worked under John Browning before the war and had smuggled himself out of occupied Belgium to continue arms design in Britain. The FAL had originally been chambered for the .280 British. Rechambered for the NATO round, it was a tilting breech block, gas-operated rifle with an adjustable gas regulator, a feature that let a soldier tune the amount of gas driving the action, which mattered a great deal in bad conditions. The American entry began as something else entirely. Springfield Armory's Earl Harvey had developed the T-25, a genuinely new design, and it had not impressed anyone in testing. What replaced it was far more conservative, a modified M1 Garand. Shorten the gas system, add a detachable box magazine, add a selector, adjust the operating rod. Engineers at Springfield, including Lloyd Corbett, developed it through a sequence of designations that eventually arrived at the T-44. Here is where the story diverges from the version most people know. The T-44 was not the Army's favoured horse. Through 1952 and 1953, the Belgian rifle, designated T-48 in American testing, had the momentum. Two American firms, High Standard and Harrington and Richardson, received contracts to produce T-48s domestically. FN was reportedly willing to waive royalties for US production. Meaningful figures within the Army viewed the Belgian rifle as the practical choice, and the T-44 program continued on limited funding, kept alive largely by Springfield Armory's own institutional will. Then came the cold. The Arctic trials at Fort Churchill in the winter of 1953 into 1954 were designed to expose exactly the kind of failure that gets soldiers killed. In extreme cold, lubricants thicken, metal contracts, tolerances change, and gas systems that work perfectly at Aberdeen in July begin to short stroke. Both rifles struggled. The T-44 had failures. But the T-48s malfunctioned in ways that drew particular attention, and the fix, opening up the gas regulator substantially, became part of the record. The reports from Churchill did not destroy the Belgian rifle. What they did was reopen a question that had been drifting toward closed. The T-48 was no longer obviously the safe choice, and that changed the political weather inside Ordnance. It also bought Springfield time, and time was the one thing the T-44 program needed. By the 1956 trials, the American rifle had matured, and the arguments that decided the contest were not, in the end, primarily about reliability. The first was weight. The T-44 was lighter, by roughly a pound depending on configuration and which report you read. A pound sounds trivial until you multiply it across a rifle company carrying ammunition, water, and equipment for days. Ordnance had been chasing weight reduction for a decade, and here was a measurable win. The second was manufacturing. The T-44 was at its core a reworked Garand. Springfield Armory argued that existing M1 tooling, gauges, and machinery could be adapted to produce it. In an army thinking about mobilization for a general war with the Soviet Union, the ability to convert an existing industrial base quickly was a serious strategic argument. The third argument is the one nobody wrote into the official evaluations, and it is impossible to prove with a single document. The T-44 was American. It came from the National Armory that had produced US service rifles since the 18th century. Historians of the program have generally concluded that institutional preference played a role alongside the technical findings, and the British, who had already surrendered their cartridge to American insistence, did not receive the outcome graciously. Whether that preference was decisive or merely reinforcing is a genuinely open question. The technical case for the T-44 was real. So was the pressure. On the 1st of May, 1957, the United States adopted the T-44E4 as the M14 rifle. Springfield Armory had won. And then the second argument, the manufacturing one, collapsed. The claim that the M14 could be produced on Garand tooling turned out to be substantially wrong. The rifle differed in enough dimensions and processes that conversion proved slow and expensive. Springfield Armory itself struggled to deliver. Harrington and Richardson and Winchester received contracts and struggled too. Early production rifles came out of the plants with quality problems serious enough that deliveries fell far behind schedule. For a period in the early 1960s, American infantry units were still carrying Garands because the rifle meant to replace them could not be built fast enough. A fourth manufacturer, Truck, an automotive and aerospace company with no firearms history, eventually produced M14s of notably good quality by applying mass production techniques from outside the gun industry. That is a real achievement, and it is also an indictment of how the program had been run. Meanwhile, the rifle's other promise was quietly failing. The M14 was supposed to replace the bar as an automatic weapon. Fired on full automatic, a 9-pound rifle chambered for a full power cartridge is close to uncontrollable. The Army fitted selector locks to most rifles, effectively making them semi-automatic. Attempts to fix the problem produced the M14A1 with a heavier stock and a pistol grip, which improved matters without solving them. The one-weapon concept, the entire justification for the program, did not survive contact with physics. In 1963, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara halted further M14 procurement. Production ended the following year. By the late 1960s, the M16 had displaced it as the standard service rifle in Vietnam, and Springfield Armory, the institution that had fought for a decade to keep the T-44 alive, was closed in 1968. The M14 served as the standard US service rifle for roughly 7 years. The rifle it beat did rather better. The FAL was adopted, in one form or another, by something in the neighborhood of 90 nations. British and Commonwealth forces carried it as the L1A1. It fought in Africa, in South America, in the Middle East, across the Cold War and after it. It acquired a nickname that would have been unthinkable at Fort Churchill in 1953, the right arm of the free world. And in 1982, in the South Atlantic, British and Argentine soldiers shot at each other with the same rifle. So did the FAL fail? At Fort Churchill, in the specific and narrow sense that matters to a procurement decision, it failed a test it needed to pass. That failure mattered. It reopened a competition that had been closing, but the honest reading of the record is that the T-48 lost an American contract rather than a contest of merit, and it lost it to a combination of weight, manufacturing promises that proved false, and an institutional preference that the documents rarely state outright. There is one final turn. The M14 never quite went away. Its accuracy with the full power cartridge kept it in service as a sniper platform, the M21, and later the M25, and when American units in Afghanistan found themselves fighting across valleys at ranges where the 5.56 round lost authority, rebuilt M14s came out of storage as designated marksman rifles, fitted with optics and modern chassis systems. Decades after the rifle had supposedly been retired, the weapon that was almost rejected became the standard. The standard lasted 7 years, and the qualities that made it the wrong answer to the question the Army asked in 1957. The weight, the power, the long-range performance of a full-size cartridge turned out to be the reason it was still being issued in the 21st century. Springfield Armory won the argument. The rifle just took another 50 years to prove which argument it had actually won. If you want the history behind the weapons, decisions, and failures that rarely make the textbook, subscribe to the Arms Vault.